Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatter, a podcast from The Gist. On today's show we're talking to Francesca Lake from the Future Science Group. They publish journals and we're running a series of promotions last week in honour of Open Access Week. So Open Access Week was all about promoting the idea of open access journals, whereby anyone and everyone can read scientific journals rather than just those who pay for them or are part of an organisation who pay for them. We got onto a whole range of crazy topics, everything from 3D printing organs to AI to the future of scientific research and much, much more. You'll have to listen to find out what. Today's episode is sponsored by Unison. Unison are one of the largest trade unions in the country. And if you want to find out more about what they do to fight to protect workers' rights, consumers' rights, and the NHS, you can follow the link in the description below. So let's get on with the interview. So Francesca, thanks for agreeing to talk to us on such short notice. You can shed a little light on what open access is for myself and anyone who chooses to listen.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
So do you want to explain a little bit about what open access is and what Open Access Week is?
Mm-hmm. So open access is essentially what it says. It's the open access to, in this case, scholarly research. There are plenty of flavours of open access, which is part of its beauty, but also makes it very complicated. There is gold open access, which means that when we, as a publisher, release people's research, it's free to view to anyone with minimal restrictions on its reuse. So quite often people can reuse images from it or remix the content depending on the license it's published under. There's also green open access, which means it's research is published behind a paywall for an embargo period, which for us is 12 months in the biomedical sciences, but it's a lot longer in, I think, the social sciences, for example. That allows publishers to make returns on their input for the embargo period, whereas the gold open access version, authors often pay us up front to provide our services. There's also archives, which people are using a lot now, which is a form of green open access, which is where primarily people in the physics and maths fields at the moment will upload their first drafts so that people can read that for free, and then anything then the publishers treat it as a normal manuscript. So anything they've added value-wise is still with them, as it were.
Okay. Well, it definitely sounds like a much better way for getting information out there for people to be able to read,
mm-hmm.
especially in a time when people maybe don't read enough.
Yes.
But financially, how does it work for researchers or for publishing houses?
Mm-hmm. So green open access is free for researchers, as I mentioned. The publisher makes their return on the time period when the article's behind a paywall, so they're charging subscription fees. Gold open access is charged upfront to the authors, who normally pay through their funding. So, for example, funders such as the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they require their authors to publish open access and put quite a large amount of funds aside to allow them to do that. Some researchers won't have the funds, and most publishers will provide reductions in fee or complete fee waivers for people in, say, countries classified as low income. So it varies, but generally people have access to funds, or the publisher will be able to help them out.
Okay. Do you think that there's still a place for journals in, today's society, where we've got almost every piece of information that you could possibly want at the touch of a button, really?
Mm-hmm.
It's all at your fingertips.
I think the role of journals in the scientific process is changing quite a lot, especially in the electronic era, as you say. There's been a lot of debate around the place of publishers. We do add a lot of value to the process at this time, that people haven't come up with a way to.
What values that?
So,
Not to suggest that you're not, but.
No, that's okay. So one such thing is the peer review process. So whenever, we have an article submitted, we will send it out to a number of experts who'll then provide, requests to the authors to change things to make it more scientifically sound or clearer. We will then liaise with the authors to help them make those changes to make their article a publishable standard. And then we will help a lot with the language editing of articles. And journals also at this time, are kind of, if you go to a scientific journal, it's correct information. I'd hate to use a buzzword, but there is a lot of fake news.
Actually, we had a woman on from the Computational Propaganda Project, and they've been looking at they call it junk news, and I think that's such a better phrase for it. I'm trying to use junk news instead of fake news because I think it just gets much more to the crux behind what people are talking about when they use the word fake news to describe false sources. I think that junk news just classifies it much better.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we do have to fight against a lot of fake research. So in some aspects, fake news would potentially be right, but junk news, I think, is a good term for it.
I think the word's fake. I can't get Trump pointing at the CNN reporter and saying you're fake news out of my head whenever I hear the term. So it's kind of ruined for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is true. There is for anyone interested in finding out exactly what publishers do, the Scholarly Kitchen released a really nice roundup of over 90 things, I think, that publishers do, which a lot of people don't know about, or maybe, just don't know about. There is still a place for us in the current climate. Okay. How the relationship will change in the future, I can only speculate, and wouldn't want to speculate, so we'll see how it evolves.
Well, I think we've gone from a point where people want all their information for free to a point where people, I think, are now almost more willing to pay for information that they know is quality. Because if you look at the way that, say, The Guardian or the New York Times or the Washington Post, just to sort of throw out three the big ones that I know that have paywalls, The Economist as well, they let you see a certain amount for free, and then if you want the rest of their journalism, you have to pay. And I feel like people are becoming more willing to pay for what they think is quality information now than they maybe would have been if you'd said 5 or 10 years ago. I think we've sort of gone from that peak of everything needs to be free online to people being more willing to pay for high quality content or research. But with open access sort of beginning to permeate journals, do you see physical journals disappearing? Do you see them remaining as legacy things, or do you maybe getting a vogue in 5 years like vinyl has now? Or
print, I personally think print issues are going to go. We barely print anything anymore. It artificially, it heightens the cost of us publishing the content, so we have to keep prices high, and not many people read it anymore. In terms of online, I personally see journals remaining, but potentially not in the guise they currently are. So I don't know if you've seen, but there's hundreds of journals, maybe even thousands. But there's also a lot of services which aggregate content. So I don't know whether people will move more towards reading things through their content aggregators. We'll see how that relationship evolves, because at the moment a lot of the content aggregators take the readers back to the journal site. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's kind of something. Well, it's happening in print journalism, with there's apps like Texture that you get where they have thousands of different magazine articles, and they aggregate them on the app, and it's like people pay like a monthly fee to get access to like thousands of magazines rather than paying for one subscription. Do you think that would actually physically work for journals, given the amount of money that's required to put into the research and the publishing to begin with? Do you think that's viable? Do you think it would just be like a fairly costly monthly subscription fee, or do you think it would, you'd find people maybe crowdfunding research?
Crowdfunding is an interesting concept. I don't know at this point. There are aggregators of the, earlier when I mentioned the kind of preprint sides of things, there are aggregators of preprint, so that's pre the production, the publication phase, who have received quite a lot of funding from the funders who also currently fund open access, so they could perhaps shift. But as I mentioned, there are not very many, there isn't really a way at this point of taking the publishers out of the process. So I don't think it could all come through I don't think the aggregators have the ability at this point to manage that process without the publishers. So I don't see it at this point. It's not a very clear thing to say.
Have you heard of any crowdfunding of scientific research? Is that a thing, or am I just making that up?
I think there's been some. There's a thing called community science, which people are more and more doing.
Okay.
But it's not mainstream. I think one of the things I like about open access is that the public can engage more in science because they can actually read it. No member of the public is going to take out a whole subscription to a journal. That most of it is going to be complete gobbledygook to them. A lot of open access journals now have lay abstracts, for example, so they include summaries that are meant to be readable by the public. So I'm hoping that they'll get more of an insight into the science that's going on through open access, and then they might become interested in becoming more involved, and say, for example, antibiotic resistance. That's something that's a lot of the public are really keen on, so they might be interested in crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm. With the open access thing, do you think it is aimed at the public getting a better understanding of science, or do you think it's more aimed at people within the scientific community who maybe don't read as many journals as they would like to because of the cost associated with them? Because when you look at what happens with, for example, OpenAI, who do a lot of work, that's Elon Musk's firm, and they try and publish everything and make everything open source, all their research. But if I was to go in and try and read their stuff, it would probably just melt my head because of the level of complexity. Do you think there's like scope for enough of the public to want to get interested in reading scientific journals because it's there, or do you think people would just, I don't know, do you think it's more aimed at scientists who are already interested, and that just means they don't have to pay for it?
I think originally open access grew out of people wanting access, other scientists wanting access to research, because subscription fees were getting really high, so a lot of libraries couldn't afford them, so you just couldn't read research. That's what's kind of pushed open access forward over the years. I think opening up science to the public has been more of a byproduct, that people are looking at a lot more now that open access is a lot more mainstream. Okay.
So do you see your, like, a future utopian world where everyone reads their open access journals on the way on the tube on the way to work?
I mean, that would be great. I think at this point there is quite a big gap between the readability of really expert scientific articles that most members of the public won't quite get. But a lot of journals are now putting quite a lot of effort into bridging that gap, helping scientists write lay abstracts, creating graphical abstracts which lay out more in picture format. So I'd like, and I think it's feasible, to see a world where people might read an article that says, chocolate cures cancer, and then be able to look at the scientific research and understand whether this article that has no particular known source is actually based on something that's real or not.
Do you think that move for scientists and for researchers is a little bit difficult, to try and not dumb down their work, but to try and make it more understandable for the layman? Do you think that that's something that you might find pushback on from maybe older academics, or just ones who just want to do their research and, be left alone?
The journal I publish, we always have lay abstracts with our articles, and we ask the authors to write them, and then we help them with the terminology if it's still too complicated. I've never had any pushback from anyone to say, I don't want to do this. Most of the time, they quite enjoy writing it. I explain it to them, like, say, imagine you're explaining your research to a patient or to your mum. How would you say it? And they don't often think about it like that, and they seem to quite enjoy it. So I think it's something that will increase.
So they kind of get not the thrill, but you find sometimes that you get scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson is a fantastic example, or Brian Cox, or someone who's just, like really charismatic hence why they're famous as scientists. And they clearly get like a real thrill out of explaining what they're researching or learning about to people in a way that regular people can understand. I feel like they get a real like buzz off of like getting people to understand like the complexities of what they're trying to understand. So it could be something that scientists really enjoy. I can't claim to know a whole lot of scientists aside from the ones I've met at university, and none of them are old enough or grumpy enough yet to be like hermit researchers. But with the Future Studies Institute, how did you get started yourself with publishing open access journals? Was that something you were always passionate about, like throughout your career, or was it something that you've only come to recently?
It's Future Science Group.
Future Science Group, sorry.
So I started my career as a scientist. Not really a career. So I did a master's degree in biology as an undergrad, which was interesting. And I realised that labs were not for me. A certain kind of person can deal with being in a lab and having research fail and fail and fail. I just wasn't one of them. I really respect the people who do it. And so I went into publishing as a graduate. And I developed my interest in open access over time, really. So I joined Future Science Group in 2011, and I started working on hybrid journals. So those are the ones behind us that are primarily subscription but have an open access component. Always saw how open access articles were always the most read. They always had the most impact online, for obvious reasons, really. And then the company chose to launch its first open access journal in 2015, and I stepped up to take that job on, which was really interesting, because we were essentially moving into a brand new business model. And I've just really enjoyed learning about it ever since. I personally think open access is the way forward, although that remains to be seen completely. We'll see how that landscape evolves. So
that's certainly the direction that information is moving. But how would you, to kind of go to like how you get people interested in reading their first open access bit of research? Do you think it's something that needs to be sparked at an educational level, just like an interest in science? Because I know I find, like, since I've left school and university and things, looking back on what we'd have been studying or, learning about bits and pieces since, or, watching Neil deGrasse Tyson and be like, geez, why didn't my physics teacher explain it like that? Mm. Do you think it's something that needs to be pushed harder? Because, so Brian Cox, actually, I mentioned him, he is doing a lot of work about trying to get the scientific method to be like a really huge part of the curriculum, in teaching people critical thinking skills and the idea of peer review and checking and constantly trying to prove yourself wrong, and that's the only way you get to the correct answer.
Yeah.
Do you think it's something that needs to be kind of pushed at educational levels, or do you think that once open access journals potentially become more widely distributed, more common knowledge, more of a common practice within the industry, that people will sort of naturally gravitate towards them? Or which way do you think it is?
I think there's a big need for more science communication, to encourage people to read scientific research. There are a lot of new sites now which write quite in quite a nice way and actually cite where the research is coming from. I think we need more of that. I definitely think we need more focus on learning how science works in schools. I'm aware of a few projects ongoing to kind of do that, which is really good to see. So, I mean, personally, I read a lot of open access articles while I was a student because I wanted to stay at home and not go to the library. So I think in terms of people who are going into a scientific career, they will always be pro open access, and keen to read it because they've learned about it from being a student. But I do think we need more science communication to get the information out to the public and get them interested. Mm-hmm.
If you had to pitch it to someone, why should you love science in school, what would you say?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, I've always really loved science because I always wanted to know why. I mean, I was always fascinated by how does my heart beat? Why am I alive?
On like a physical, like biological level, or like a philosophical level?
Oh, physical. I've always been a physical sciences person. Sort of how you get from being an embryo to an actual fully fledged human being. That was always what fascinated me. So anyone who's interested in why anything is as it is. I mean, even philosophical stuff is still science. It's still science, and there are really interesting reasons.
I know several professors who would probably disagree with you.
Okay. I mean, I don't pretend to particularly understand philosophical reasoning, so.
Some of it goes over my head. My girlfriend does philosophy, so I get to hear some of it. And some of it's fascinating, and some of it just confuses me. Like she came home after doing a class one day. It was, why is a chair a chair? What makes a chair a chair? Yeah, like a full class about that.
Oh. Okay.
I was just like, I had some pretty pointless law lectures in my time, but
yeah, I don't think that's not my bag.
No. But yeah, talking about the why thing, I was kind of thinking about it last night actually, and I can't remember what someone said to me, but they were talking about something. They just said like a fact to me, and I was like, I really don't like. I need someone to explain why a fact is a fact, and before I'll accept it as a fact.
Yeah.
Like if someone says, oh yeah, like you need 2 grams of salt or whatever a day. I don't know what the recommended dosage is now, or, you know, you need 6 hours of sleep to have a good night's sleep, or, you know, don't drink too much coffee, the caffeine's bad for you. I have to be like, why? Like, what? Are you sure? Why? Why is that?
Yeah.
I think it's something that we'd probably be in a much better position as a society if we asked why a bit more, but
yeah, I do think there needs to be more encouragement to do that.
Yeah, it's you want to teach critical thinking, but so in the journal that you sort of, what's your official role in it?
I'm the managing editor.
You're the managing editor. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what sort of things get published in your journal?
So we publish anything that can have any role in human health. So that can be anything from information about drugs, that clinical trials at the bedside, all the way back to finding out whether some snail has a particular compound in it that could at some point be used to treat heart disease. So the whole spectrum of biomedical research, which is really fun. Teaches me.
You must get like a whole wide range of different things you get to publish. Well, what's the craziest, like most outlandish bit of research you've ever published in the journal?
Some of it can be very outlandish. I'm trying to think. I mean, it depends where you're coming from. The researchers who published it probably didn't think it was outlandish. The most controversial thing I published was a commentary on the need for a revolution in psychiatry research.
In what way?
This person was commenting on the fact that there's not a huge amount of evidence-based research in the profession at this point, and that generated a huge amount of debate. I mean, I was a bit unsure.
What was his premise, that there isn't a lot of evidence-based research in psychiatry? Like, what is it? Is it that things are based more on not hearsay, but like established like practices, and no one's really doing any new research on things, or what was his reasoning?
There was quite a bit of reasoning. Okay. I'd recommend reading the article to anyone. I don't want to summarise it wrong because it was so controversial.
Okay. What was it called? And we'll put it in the description.
In search of an evidence-based role of psychiatry. For psychiatry.
Okay.
I recommend to read it. It's a really interesting article. There was potential issues with publishing it, but as a journal we tried to remain unbiased. So it was scientifically sound argument, so it got published, and we're completely, if anyone is not in agreement with the authors, we are completely open to people writing in. They can write a letter to the editor, which we can publish as well. That's what we're here for, to open discussion. And something else we published that was really interesting was a commentary on why animals are still needed in research.
Okay.
Which is, again, a really controversial topic. It was from actually a Nobel laureate and one of her colleagues. Essentially saying we're still not there yet. There are plenty of research lines ongoing to reduce or replace the need for animals in research, but we're not there yet, and we can't just stop research. So that was a really interesting piece.
Hi, where are we on that, actually?
So that's some of the hot topic research that's ongoing at the moment. So I recently published a special issue on organs on chips. So essentially you create a little microchip that's got enough of an organ built onto it to simulate how that organ would react if you treated it with a drug.
So, like a physical organ with a microchip?
The microchip with cells on it.
Yeah. How big are we talking? Like a handful of cells, or?
Enough cells to simulate like the layering of an organ.
Okay.
So, for example, kidney, you've got loads of layers, and they're about a few centimeters big.
Okay.
And then you can also link them up to create a human on a chip.
Okay.
And then you can create blood flow, and you can see how the drug interacts with each of the organs.
Okay.
It's really interesting, but it is not far enough yet to replace animals in research.
Okay.
That's really cool.
That sounds really interesting. Because I've always been sort of interested in how, like, if we could just, I don't know where I stand ethically on whether if like we could grow like either brain dead organs or brain dead like animals or people or just organs by themselves. Like what are we morally able to do to them?
Yeah, I went to a conference a little while ago on biomaterials, and I went to a talk where someone was saying that theoretically we could print a heart in 30 minutes and print a human in a few hours.
I've seen like 3D printed, like, was either a kidney, maybe it was a bladder or something that they were planning to go to trial with soon. But I think maybe was it a pancreas? I need to look that up.
Yeah.
But they 3D printed an organ. That was that was the main crux of it. And I'm really, really interested to see how quickly we get there. Because once you solve that, the problem with your body getting old, then the only thing you have to worry about is the mind. And I'm honestly curious to see whether that does anything to life expectancy, because obviously you've got like a life expectancy has increased like massively, but that's not, it's not like everyone was used to live to the like 50 and then you die. You either like die at like 5 or 10 as like a child, or maybe in war, or through some, I don't know, just your village getting raided, or you get executed for something. There was just a lot more killing in general, in the past, and people still lived to like 60, 70, 80, 90, but there was just more barriers to overcome in terms of staying alive, and that we've kind of removed a lot of those barriers, and that medicine hasn't pushed us as far as people maybe think because of the way the average works. But I know we're kind of not leveling out, but that upward trend is kind of starting to curve a little bit, in that scientists feel that there's potentially a limit to how old we can get.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested to see at what point 3D printing of organs means that the only thing we have to worry about is the mind. Do you think how far off do you think we are from 3D printed organs?
I think the idea of transplanting a 3D organ into somebody is far off for a lot of people, but it isn't far off in terms of scientific research, which always takes ages to get into the clinic anyway. I think the idea of printing people enough to keep them alive for longer, I think that is a very long way off. If it's ever going to happen, there's so many ethical implications that we'd have to overcome.
With the ethical thing though, someone, I think it was Joe Rogan, I was listening to the podcast with the guy who made that Icarus film about the doping in athletics and how widespread it is, and how the Russians have done it in the Sochi Olympics, and he essentially made the point that we can sit and debate the ethical and moral ramifications of it, but China and Russia aren't going to. They're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was rumoured research. I don't know whether it is going ahead or not, where they wanted to transplant someone's head. I mean, I guess if that works, then you could theoretically 3D print someone's body, and if the 3D printed body would then work, and we're not close to that yet.
No.
Who knows? Ethics is a tricky subject.
Well, that's the next bullshit job. Ethicists. It's a real thing. Like a lot of companies are starting to hire ethicists for the ethical ramifications, because they think millennials are really concerned about the morality and being a good person and all that rubbish. With what are you working on at the moment in the next? Is there anything interesting that's coming out with the next issue of your open access journal? Or
I mean, well, most of the stuff on my next issue is actually already online, because we publish and then make it
like a compilation sort of thing. Okay.
So there's some interesting things in there about new ways of looking for biomarkers of cancer to try and pick it up earlier than we do now, which is always a good idea.
Have you seen the AI research that's being done with machine learning in cancer?
I haven't yet.
So essentially what they're doing is they take like 10,000 MRI scans, or just thousands and thousands of people with and without cancer, and they get this machine learning algorithm to learn to spot where cancerous growths are. And after they did that, it became infinitely better than a human doctor.
I'm not surprised.
at spotting really minuscule, tiny tumors. And ultimately that's probably the way things are going to go because as soon as technology becomes more proficient than people, that's when you're going to start and see it proliferated. And there's probably going to be pushback with, okay, so now you're just replacing all doctors, that idea anyway. But I'm really interested to see like how far machine learning can take us in just like scientific and medical research in general. I think you could almost get to the point where the only things that humans are required for in medicine is not the nurse's job, but like that sort of personal touch. I feel that's probably the reality, because machines are already better at spotting cancer. As soon as you get them, that's just one algorithm and they just ran it. And it didn't take them like a particularly lengthy amount of time. It was just done with Google's DeepMind. And they're starting to put it into trials like all over the world now. And I just think it's a crazy exciting time to be in your profession. You must be getting to see some really amazing research being done and some pretty crazy ideas.
Yeah.
Or at least things that you maybe wouldn't have thought were possible 10 years ago.
Oh, definitely.
Like sometimes I have to pinch myself. It's like, wow, we're really in the future. Like my friend was building like a USB hub for his laptop with a wireless charger built in last night. He was like, yeah, just ordered this all on Amazon. All of this technology, all like USB ports, all the wires. He had no idea how to do it. He was just on Google, just like figuring out how to do it as it went along. And it's just like, we do kind of live in the future.
Yeah, I think you can buy DNA sequencing on Amazon now.
And the cost of like sequencing the human genome has gone from like a couple of million to a couple of thousand in the last 10 years.
Like that, yeah.
So, how far do you think we are from like you were saying 3D printing like people's bodies to be?
I mean, they think they're fairly close to being able to, say, 3D print some skin back, like directly over a wound with all the layers. The hair follicle was causing a lot of issues.
Really?
But I think creating like a heart is so complex. I think that's further off. And something like a brain, I mean, I don't think they've even thought about that yet. Well, they've probably thought about it.
Oh, people have definitely thought about it. But then if you were going to do a brain, I don't think it would be like fleshy. I think if they get to the point where they can 3D print a brain, that means they understand absolutely everything that's going on inside there, and there's no way they take the biological option, because if you were able to like simulate or like create a computer network that had the same power as the human brain, like just all the same sequencing, everything, but like in a computer form, it would be thousands of times faster than a human brain, just because technological circuits are quicker than biological ones. So if you had an AI, Sam Harris talks about this a lot. If you had an AI that had literally just the equivalent of a human intelligence and a human brain, then it would be doing the equivalent of 20,000 years of human thought in a week. So something tells me they would probably pick the computer, the technical option, rather than the biologically grown brain at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's out of I've got no knowledge about that kind of thing, so.
That's fair. It's a pretty crazy thought. Like, I don't even know if you can get your head around, actually get your head around how mad 20,000 years of human thought in a week is.
I think it's going to be fairly impossible for anyone to do that, because you can't comprehend it.
No, Sam Harris, when he talks about it, he's super, super, super worried. He's like a merchant of doom a little bit with AI. He's just like, how do we deal with this? Like, are we actually like, look how people deal with intelligence now in people. How are you going to deal with something that you can't even begin to comprehend?
Mm. Yeah.
When you're post-truth, how do you deal with it being incapable of saying anything else? Not to put you on edge, don't be losing sleep over it. I don't think we're quite there yet.
I mean, I've seen iRobot, so.
Yeah, but in iRobot he wins. Will Smith wins. He beats the AI.
Well, yeah. I don't think that would actually happen, would it? But...
Have you seen Ex Machina?
Yes.
That is I think that's way more terrifying than iRobot.
That film is really disturbing.
Not to give any spoilers, but it's just terrifying. I was watching like a 4-hour interview with Sam Harris talking about AI, and then went and watched that film, and I just spent the whole thing being like, he's right, we're screwed.
Well, we're only screwed if we actually take that path, although it feels like.
Well,
we probably will.
The Elon Musk and Sam Harris are both kind of the opinion that as long as humanity doesn't die, like, or we don't have some like extinction level event, that technological progress, no matter how slow, will eventually lead to the point where we can simulate the human brain. And at that point, you've got that crazy 20,000 years of thought, and then it's just increases, like it can improve itself exponentially, and then, yeah.
You have to hope it's nice.
Yeah. Just gotta build it with emojis, and then it'll be fine. At least it'll be saying nice things in pictures for you.
Mm.
But to get back to your science rather than scaring everyone with AI, is there something that you are really passionate about in science? Do you have like a specific area of expertise?
No, so my degree was I just did an undergrad degree in biology and then a master's degree in biology. I spent my master's lab projects sequencing the mitochondrial DNA of a cattle population in Africa, which was pretty interesting. But my degree was so general. I've always had quite a general interest in science. I like seeing where it all fits together, which supports my knowledge with my new journal, my open access journal, because I get to see everything in biomedical. I mean, I would say my passion is in biomedical things. Although I do also really, really enjoy physics, watching Brian Cox and everything.
Yeah.
It's always really good. And my passions kind of follow what the breaking research that's ongoing. So as we mentioned earlier, the organ on a chip stuff, that makes me, I find that really exciting.
Yeah.
And the ability to test for all sorts of cancers by just taking someone's blood and finding it early when it's treatable. That kind of thing really gets me excited.
Do you think we're far off getting the cure for the big C?
The cure is a different matter.
Or at least a treatment that's like more effective than, or less invasive perhaps is a better word than chemotherapy.
That's the target at the moment. A huge amount of research is going into it. But the problem is that every tumour is different. And within each tumour, there's a variety of population of cells. So it's a bit like antibiotic resistance. You can kill a bunch of the cancer cells, but then there'll be some that just evolve because that's what a tumour is. It's rapidly evolving cells that will evolve, that will be resistant to the therapy. And then it'll come back, it'll get worse, then you have to do a new therapy, and then eventually you'll run out of different therapies. So the target really at the moment is personalised medicine. So being able to tell from a person's tumour, say, exactly what combination of drugs. That's also I say it's the new thing, but it's been the new thing for a while, combining drugs so that you hit every cell in the tumour. So tumours are more, I'm aware cancer is kind of like a catch-all term for things, but so tumours are incredibly like different then depending on, obviously like it depends on the area of the body, like you can have like different like levels of aggression of tumours. Yeah. Is that the right way of describing it? Yeah. And you can get obviously ones that develop more rapidly. What would you say to people who sort of proliferate the idea that cancer is, we haven't got a cure because it's more profit to treat rather than cure? I'd say that's poppycock. Cancer's one of the most funded things, most funded areas of research. And charities in that area are able to fund a huge amount of research themselves. It is because they're so complicated. One person's brain tumour is completely different to another person's brain tumour. I think there was a news story recently on the BBC that there's a range of thousands of genes that can mutate to cause a cancer, and you only need 2 of those genes. You need to find out which genes have mutated. Some genes will cause the cancer cells to proliferate faster, which means you've got more chance of more mutations. Some of them will cause them to make the cells live longer. There's a huge range, and the therapies we have available generally target specific parts of the tumour, specific proteins on the tumour cell surface, for example. If a cell doesn't have that protein, then it's not going to kill it. So you need to find out the exact information about each person's tumour cells before you can actually kill it.
Okay. Because I know that I saw, well, this could be out of date, but I know I read a year or two ago that despite like all the research that's gone into what causes cancer and the number of different stories you see every week about red wine causes cancer, red wine prevents cancer, chocolate causes, the sort of story. But the biggest factor was still genetics and luck. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And, made me frantically start searching my family tree. And
that's interesting. I mean, again, the genetics depends on the cancer. We had a talk here the other day it was breast cancer awareness. We had a lady come in, and she was saying that for breast cancer, genetics is actually quite a small reason for people having breast cancer. It's actually more just to do with age, with that one.
Okay.
So again, it really depends on the cancer as to what the predisposition factors are. Lung cancer, it's really smoking and other inhaled things. So essentially everything will be bad for you at some point.
Yeah.
So.
I just the whole topic of human health is kind of mind blowing. I have a friend who's quite sort of diet conscious and is really into his nutrition and everything, and I feel like I've got the opinion of a lot of people, and you go, well, I want to know exactly what I should be eating, but where do I start? Like, what do you know? Like, obviously there's, lots of fresh food. Don't eat loads of red meat. Don't eat loads of sugar. Don't eat loads of like trans fats.
Mm-hmm.
Try and steer towards like healthy fats, not too much protein, but protein, fruit and vegetables, like that sort of thing. I just find it like such an overwhelming area of science to try and delve into, because there's like, if you Google what should I be eating, there's a billion different articles that will tell you all the opposite things.
Mm-hmm.
And like the amount of different like ketogenic diets, or people trying to convince you that plant-based diet is the best, or there's people who are all raw food, that's the best.
Mm-hmm.
I really struggle to get my head around which ones, where do you even begin with things like that?
Well, theoretically, you want to go back to the scientific journals, because they'll be the ones publishing the research that should theoretically be less biased, and therefore should be sound. However, I'm aware that a lot of people react differently to diets, so it depends on who you are. Yeah. So again, there's no winning either way.
What like major disease do you think that we're closest to getting a cure to, or at least like a better treatment to, of like cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, like that sort of thing, dementia, like those, like the big ones that are kind of...
Mm-hmm. That is a hard question. There's so much research being published in all those fields, so much money being pumped into it. I would like to think that diabetes might be the closest one out of those three, because there's a lot more people can be doing to prevent that, and it's a little easier to research, because unlike cancer, it's not loads of different things all in one category. Alzheimer's is difficult because we still don't fully understand the brain. Infectious diseases are always going to be the earliest ones that we can cure. They have been the ones that we've cured historically. So they're probably your next ones. But when you start thinking about the big ones, it's difficult to say.
Yeah. Alzheimer's, I saw that they've trialed ultrasound on the brain to get rid of the like brain plaques that you get that build up that are part of what causes it. But then, obviously, like you said, we don't quite understand the brain, so that's kind of maybe a hit and hope.
Yeah, I guess so. I think the key there is picking it up early again, and figuring out how to treat it. But people who have Alzheimer's, typically, I think it's 5 years before you actually start to show symptoms, so we need blood tests.
Yeah. It's not good. Can you get a blood test for Alzheimer's?
That's something that's being worked on.
Okay. There's research and stuff into it?
Yeah.
How early can you catch it with that? Do you know?
I don't know.
You don't have the research. Well, fair enough. I can't expect you to be an expert in all areas of biomedical science.
I know a small amount about a lot of different fields.
No, that's fair enough. I can't fault you. Jack of all trades myself, so I'm always amazed when people are like have encyclopedic knowledge about like a certain topic. It baffles me. It's like, how much did you have to read to get to this level of knowledge?
Yeah.
They amaze me, especially professors who just, they can remember studies from 30 years ago off the top of their head, and you're just like, have you been quoting that for 30 years and that's why you remember, or is it because...
Who knows?
Yeah. But then, yeah, just to wrap up, is there anything you wanted to sort of mention that you were working on at the moment? Is there anything that you're doing event-wise for Open Access Week, or?
So Open Access Week's really exciting. It happens every year. It's its 10th year this year, I think. It's essentially a global event to promote understanding and interest in open access. As I mentioned at the start, it's quite complicated. Even scientists don't always understand the difference between green and gold open access, and which funder requires them to do which thing. There's loads of rules that they have to meet. So it's essentially a week-long event full of many events aimed at promoting open access, trying to drive it forward as a thing and helping people understand it. This year's theme is Open in Order To, so it's trying to get people to talk about why publish open access. There are a load of accepted things, such as facilitating collaboration. Someone who's working in biophysics won't have access to oncology journals, so if they want to read the research, then and potentially collaborate with specific researchers, open access helps. It's to drive people being able to read it who are in lower income countries, who don't have the library subscriptions, etc. There are many reasons why someone might publish open access. So what we're doing is we're having researchers submit short 30-second videos just talking about exactly why they support open access, to try and help people talk about it and think about open access in a different way. Because there's plenty of people out there who still only publish open access because their funders taught them to. So we kind of want people to want to do it more.
If you had like an elevator pitch to a scientist listening right now who very much loves his traditional journals, how would you pitch open access to him or her?
Well, I would say we see even a 1,000 times readership advantage for open access articles.
Like 1,000-fold over. Wow. Okay.
But that's only in some fields, but that is true for some of our journals. So you're reaching a much broader audience. You can get a lot of people chattering about it online, which means that you might generate new ideas from their discussion. You might find new collaborators. And open access journals as a whole can generally publish things that are slightly more off the wall and innovative. So if someone's doing something really breakthrough, you will occasionally get that research pushed back from the traditional journals who might want to be a bit more safe. And then but open access journals are generally more open to it. It's just how it is. So it can be a really exciting place to publish, I like to think.
Not that you're biased.
Yeah, totally not biased. So that would be my pitch.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for chatting to us.
Okay. Right, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no problem. Definitely an interesting chat. I'm always up to hear about the future of science, or the future of publishing science in this case.
I hope you got some stuff that you can use. Then.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed the interview, you can subscribe to us on YouTube or on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. You could leave us a review on iTunes or just tell your friends about what a fantastic podcast you just listened to. So don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, thanks for listening.